Good morning, everyone, and happy second week of Easter. We were saying just before we joined, I can't believe it's still the Easter holidays for many of us with the children. It feels like my kids have been off school for a month. Anyway, welcome. Thank you for joining us. As always, team, Jazz, Matt, good to see you. Ken, Dave, thank you for joining the show. Today we're going to talk about just for a change, the role of AI in our industries, but we're going to take a slight spin away from productivity and into cybersecurity defense, following the release of Microsoft Copilot for Security, which was weirdly on April the 1st, which was a very strange day to release a product, given the April Fool's jokes. But so released last week, loads of white papers, stats, productivity, security, all these kind of things, which we'll share some bits and dates with you earlier on, but phenomenal stuff. We're going to talk about today a little bit around, just to set the scene, what Security Copilot is, or Copilot for Security is. And then really the discussion we're going to lead on today is going to be about, is this something we think we need? Is this just another AI fad? Do we need it? If so, why? If we don't need it, why not? What do we think this is going to bring? And then we'll touch a little bit around, I'm sure there'll be questions about costs and questions about extensibility, adoption, all those kind of wonderful things that come up. So before we dive in, and panel, as always, first time you speak, just tell the audience who you are in case we've got any new listeners on the screen. So I'm going to just try and share a screen grab. So you've probably all seen this announcement. So this is a publicly available document. This is from Microsoft Learn, just around what Security Copilot is all around. So there's a whole. I'm not going to walk through this, but if you haven't seen it, we'll stick the link into the chat. But there's a whole set of articles around what it is, how you get started, use cases, all of those things. So we're not here today to sell the product. I think Microsoft do a pretty good job of selling their own tools to industry, but I do want to get your view on kind of what do we see it solving. So if I talk very quickly just for the panel about what Copilot for Security is, it is a generative AI powered assistant, but it's really designed around working with SecOps teams and security engineers and analysts. And I think in particular, Microsoft talk about the real value coming at the lower end, so more juniors and trainees and engineers, rather than your high end kind of SOC analysts and things. Although they talk a lot about value all the way through. What's interesting with Security Copilot is this, of course, builds on the OpenAI GPT model that Microsoft uses across their Copilot portfolio. But unlike the standard tool sets, then this is specifically trained around security. So, you're not going to use Security Copilot to write an essay about security, right? You're going to use it to help troubleshoot. And of course, I think Microsoft's real value, of course, is that this is almost hardwired in, if you like, to the extensive suite of product sets that Microsoft have got across their both their Azure environment and, of course, the Microsoft 365 product suite. So things like Defender for Cloud, Defender for Endpoint, and all of those things. So quite an interesting model. Microsoft, know that lots of security teams are taking messages and alerts and those kind of things and copying and pasting information into publicly facing LLMs and things like that, like ChatGPT or Bard. This obviously is designed to try and help mitigate that and allow the Copilot system to actually be context aware, right? So where Copilot for Microsoft 365 is grounded on your Office 365 data and the files and emails and chats and those kind of things, Copilot for Security is grounded in both the large language model, but also in the data telemetry and the signaling that your Microsoft 365 tools have. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what Copilot's designed to do. It's there really to help organizations understand their security posture, get better responses and reasoning around why something might be the case, or to help them secure or lock down or just check whether configurations are done. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what Security Copilot is all around. We'll touch on a little bit about how it works later on, there's a nice diagram we can kind of walk through if we've got time. But in short, that's what Security Copilot is about. It's available 1st of April, so available now to buy. So panel, thank you for joining. I know we had a little bit of preamble chat beforehand. Ken, I don't know whether you want to kick us off. You raised a couple of really good points before we started, but what's your kind of first thoughts, impressions about Microsoft's latest venture?
Sure. So I'm Ken Dickey. I'm the CIO for Leithway Executive Search. And Copilot, up until now, has obviously it's been associated with the productivity suite and hasn't really been something that we are massively focused on. This, though, is something that piques the interest, mainly because we are predominantly a Microsoft shop. We have multi-tiered security, and whether it's endpoint through to back end, whether it is how our SOC operates, fundamentally, we've got such an estate now where you've got things like Entra, Defender, Purview, Priva, where actually there's so much going on. The idea that you can get to a single pane of glass, the idea that juniors can actually, and that this is something that appeals, that more junior team members have the ability to query and understand and pick up some of the grind around the security, and have tooling that supports them on that, fascinates me. I'm very interested in this product. I haven't seen it used in anger yet, but unlike Copilot attached to the Office 365 environment, this for me seems to have real material value that I could probably leverage right from the off. And I've seen some of the Microsoft demos, I've seen some of the Microsoft videos, and the fact that you're asking it sort of in natural language, context-based questions, where is the threat point analysis, where's the endpoint, weaknesses, or why is our defender score so low, etc., as opposed to trying to grind through and work out why your security score has dropped. You could be asking the LLM directly, and it goes away and answers that, because it might not be in the Defender environment. It might be something that's happening in Entra or whatever. And I think that, for me, is a real opportunity to really raise the bar. And especially as security is one of these things that's continuously evolving, you can't always send everybody on all the training courses. You can't always expose them to everything. And so actually having this in the background, for me, is a really useful option. I've not seen it in real world, in the wild, though. So there's a lot of promise there.
It was a long preview as well. I think the preview was 9 months in the end, so I think it's certainly longer than 365. Jazz, what's your thoughts? So Ken touched on a couple of points there around really kind of helping more junior engineers get up to speed quickly, querying the LLMs for information and kind of knowing where to go. What's your thoughts on that as a value versus a risk with skill sets?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Jazz. I'm head of solution delivery at Gately. We're a law-led professional services company. I'm very interested, same way as Ken. Yeah, I can see the value it will add for those junior members of staff that haven't got the experience to necessarily always find the ways to get the right result, and potentially would share data in areas that, as you say, Rob, that they may not, they potentially shouldn't do. My bigger concern around this and more widely around AI is it is all targeted at more junior staff, but the more of that targeted AI around junior staff is going to lead to a reduction in that junior staff count, and you're not going to develop more senior members of the team. So security is already an area that's massively challenged on resourcing. So if you're not developing people and they're simply relying on AI tools to give them their results and tell them what they should be thinking, they're not going to develop that critical thinking. They're not going to develop a way of troubleshooting more varied types of attack, and you're going to become very dependent on these tools. So I think it needs to go hand in hand with that training continuing and ensuring that you still have the right identifiers when you're looking for threats, and you're managing teams in a way that these kind of AI tools are very complementary to what you do and not replacing those junior members of staff or that grunt work that they would do to learn their trade. So yeah, I think it's double-edged. Anything that improves security, anything that helps manage your threat position, yeah, it's got to be better. However, what impact does it have elsewhere is my question.
Yeah, and that's a really, really important point on how do we keep, I think definitely, how we address that. We know there's a massive security skills shortage. We've seen some of the, you have to look around LinkedIn at some of the salaries that are being demanded and commanded by candidates because there's such a shortage of resource. But I think your point around, are we in danger? And Dave, I'm keen on your view here. Are we in danger of having teams of people that actually are far less experienced than we need them today? And I guess proofs to be in the pudding, right? Of how these tools actually help us when there is, when there is an attack or something that happens that means we need expertise rather than an AI.
Yeah, David Maskell, Head of IT and Information Security at Thatcham Research. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I love the opportunity that this could let more junior members of the team get exposure to these tools and these services and give them some confidence that they can, analyze the data and give some input back. But that does come at a risk. We're seeing it to a certain extent in the other office co-pilots where people are just quickly co-piloting questions and arguably pulling scripts together and then they don't work, and then you have other challenges associated to that. So I think it needs to be done very carefully and considered, and just trying to manage it and assess it throughout the projects. The key for me, and it's just like Copilot for productivity, we've got to see the value of this. So for me, I'm in these tools and dashboards day in, day out. So I think Microsoft do a great job of presenting a lot of this information to me already, and assess the scores and incidents and events and all those sort of things. But I need to see the value back on this. So very keen to pilot it this year to a certain extent. And prove how much time it can give back to us. We've all seen the stats that Microsoft present and how much efficiency savings it can be. Let's see what that's real world within our organization.
Yeah, fantastic. Matt, I didn't thank you for joining us today. I know obviously Hillingdon are going through a huge digital transformation program at the moment, but interested in your you probably never had so many co-pilots thrown at you in the last 6 months, but keen on your kind of thoughts around this next wave.
Yeah, so I'm Matthew Albridge, the Chief Digital and Information Officer for Hillingdon Council, and it's undeniable that Copilot for Security is a good thing. It's useful, it's helpful, it will help to move things forward further, faster. I think I boil it down to a cost point of view. So when I look at how much money have I got, and that's not a tremendous amount in the public sector at the moment to think about security, I look at Copilot's more expensive than XDR, and I go, well, if I had to pick one or the other, what would I pick? And it's quite right on the junior members of staff. Generally across the Microsoft AI suite, it is more designed for the entry level of staff. And my concern moving forward is, with the plethora of AI tools that are coming out from Microsoft from a licenses perspective, that's ramping up, month on month, year on year. And you have, back to a lot of what everyone else has said, is you have to show the business benefits. And for me, you have to show the savings against it. They're all nice to haves, but how much can you hardwire these into delivering tangible benefits into the business? And it'd be lovely if I could throw as much money as I want to at security, and I'd absolutely go and buy a load of licenses. At the moment, I'm going, what's the best value in it from a security perspective? When we've had security incidents over the last couple of weeks, absolutely not necessarily for us, but with national bodies of applications that we use and approaches that we use, is the threats there, but is it the biggest priority? For me it is, but for the organization it's a cost and a value thing. So it's, again, show the business benefits. How much can we demonstrate that? And I've seen all the demos, and I've seen live demos, and it's great. I just get very jealous of organisations that have already got it, already bought it, already using it. But I'm not sure it's, for me, I don't think it's the best value in the security space at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting space. I mean, I think Microsoft are the first to market with this type of product set, but of course there's also that your point around the the layers, right, that we're adding onto these licenses, right? The days of buying a Microsoft 365 E3 E5 license stack of kind of there's premium everything, there's Copilot for everything. It's a huge it's a huge amount of layering that we're suddenly seeing on top of those things. And I mean, how much it's interesting, isn't it, as to you see a lot of the value today. So Copilot Security Copilot at launch obviously has that integration layer with their core product suite. Obviously, we'd expect that. The more value we're going to get from that is based on the more products that we've got for Microsoft. So, so absolutely, today, if we've got third-party endpoint protection or device management and those kind of things, Copilot's not going to help us with those things in the same way that, the Microsoft security dashboards and those kind of things don't give us as much value with those third-party products. They are, of course, committed. And there's a couple, I think, that got launched on the 1st of April. A couple of large SOC providers, and there's obviously ServiceNow and some of those integrations, but there's quite a lot coming, I think, from a third-party perspective. But it'll be interesting to see how that pricing model shifts and changes, a bit like Microsoft's done with Sentinel, I guess, with ingestion of data. So, do you see this as this is really about making sure that organizations are just totally 100% committed to the Microsoft security portfolio? Or do you think this is a really good opportunity actually to be able to leverage your existing investments in products that don't have Microsoft at the beginning of them, and use this kind of Copilot model in the future to bring all those things together in a way that we probably haven't really seen outside of outsourcing our services to a SOC? What's your
at the moment? I don't think the model, the financial model, is going to allow for leveraging the outputs of those other technologies. And I think in the security space, you don't want all your eggs in one basket, do you? But you want to be able to service that data in a single pane of glass.
Right.
And
yeah.
When their tiered licensing models become simpler and starts to ingest that information and gives you an opportunity to work across your entire suite, as Matthew mentioned, with your XDR tools and everything else that sit outside the Microsoft stack, then the value is going to be far more compelling. Right now, it's a risk to reward, isn't it, with this? How much risk are you mitigating by introducing this, but how much are you also introducing by sticking all your eggs in the Microsoft basket?
Yeah, very true.
I mean,
sorry, Ken, please.
I was just going to jump on what Jazz just said there, but just so, like, we have multiple tiers. We're not just all Microsoft, and I think that whole point of putting all your eggs in one basket is, is a crazy piece to do. But I think there is an element of, you can also have so much complexity. Anything that helps simplify it. Now, the information that we're working with in my firm is very sensitive, and we cannot afford the risk of a security breach or a cyber break or whatever you want to call it, right? The information leaks, and it will be ruinous. And it's also really important that we understand where our gaps are, and any tooling like this, which means that we've got another set of eyes. It's complementary, and it does allow us to leverage the systems we've got in a far more effective way. And it's about that balance between risk and reward, that price cost element that you've called out. And I think it's going to vary for different organizations depending on the risks that they are mitigating for. And I think that's a really interesting piece. The fact that Microsoft is building an ecosystem, it's like everybody else, right? At the end of the day, whether you're looking at the Google Suite or any of these pieces, that it's intrinsic to their design of how they make their money. So what I see in this is, for the first time, there is something here, and there's actually a question from one of the viewers about how this is not a high-end tool at the back end. There is an element where this is serviceable across the whole range of the Microsoft licensing suites, which allows individuals to process an incident, for example, and not necessarily have the complete experience, but at least take guidance. And for me, having another resource that supports my teams to address, say, an incident or a security breach in a more timely fashion with the backup. Now, obviously, we'd escalate to engineers and everything else. I mean, there's a whole piece to this, but the idea that we're more informed and we can mitigate for whatever incident in a far more effective way has real value. But it will be different for me versus another organization. So the pricing on this stuff, it's like all these things. If you go out to the market and don't look at Copilot, but look at anything else, I've forgotten what the I's product is, but there is a lot of stuff out there that is supposedly helping surface and get to that single pane of glass and that visibility and that surfacing of your security environment. It's all expensive. I mean, there is no cheap solution to this. And then the resources on top of that are also, as we called out, extremely expensive. So if we can bring talent through, somebody's interested in, we can give them some tooling and then they carry on their learning journey. I think it's a little bit like coding. I think the AI piece kind of was a shock. Sort of like all of a sudden everybody sort of went, oh, wait a minute, you can write code in all manner of different languages. AI has just replaced everybody. But that ability to write good code using the tooling means that you actually are seeing a kind of, again, an uplift in people who can code. And I think this will be the same thing for the security environment. It will come with a cost. It is what it is.
I totally agree. I think your point about, and to answer the question that's come in from LinkedIn around, helping juniors, I think we kind of touched on that quite early on. But I think, there's also an aspect of it and it's a shame it's not free, isn't it? Because you'd almost see this as your kind of ultimate onboarding, your training, right? Because you can use these tools to write your run books and your prompts and your how to deal with these things. So actually you've got, you've almost got the building blocks of how you respond rather than and defining that through natural language of what you do. So I think there's some good aspects of the technology within that. But I think there's also that point around, we talked quite a lot earlier around kind of trust and the skill sets of things around, relying on what the technology says. And Microsoft always positioned Copilot as a Copilot, right? Not an autopilot. And I think, you get to a point of, even though the information provided by the generative AI tools is there for the pilot to decide what to do with, we've already discussed this earlier on, how many actually read what it's produced, believe what it said, have got the skills and the knowledge to back up what it said to actually make those authoritative decisions, right?
It is that skills and knowledge, isn't it? Because it is targeted at the more junior staff who are going to believe what they're told verbatim. They're not going to, unless they've been educated to challenge on the responses and qualify those outputs elsewhere. It's always going to be true in their mind, isn't it?
It is, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? I think as we go through, and it's interesting when if you look at the research that Microsoft have done, then they do talk about way beyond the junior, right? They use it as they talk about it as a stepping stone around increasing some of that knowledge. They also use it as a method to look at, well, how do you devolve some of those higher class analysis roles of pulling those logs and pulling information together from multiple sources to actually give your more senior, expensive, certified, trained, skilled teams time back, right? Copilot always talks about productivity gains. I won't go into all the stats that Microsoft have shared because, I think these are always subjective, right? Whenever you hear numbers like 22, 23%, 30% time saving, they're always subjective, I think, with everything. But I think there is definitely we know there's a lot of noise. There's lots of signals that come back. There's lots of unknown. Where do I start? Where do I go? How do I look at the trends? How do I actually do things more proactively? I guess there's a question around, what happens with the industry generally, right? So I think there's definitely benefits of these kinds of technologies within organizations, but then there's lots of organizations that also pay third parties to provide managed SOC services as well. So it'd be interesting, and Keenan, your thoughts on this is, does this simply just empower those SOC analysts in those third parties to be better and therefore hopefully offer you better value if you're a client of theirs, or does it actually look to essentially put some of them out of business because you're going to have these kind of tools, right, for probably far cheaper than you could go and pay for a managed SOC or build your own? Any thoughts on that?
Or the third option, it encourages them to be lazy and rely on these tools to provide you with the data and the information you're relying on experienced resources for.
Yeah, I think Jazz has kind of nailed it there. In it, my fear would be, and that's the one element where this is, and we keep coming back to this, AI is complementary, not a replacement. My fear would be that you would see organizations and I'd have to be careful in my own that what happens is that individuals stop worrying about upskilling or understanding what they're doing. They'll just ask it a question. Oh, look, that's why this has happened. And that's it. And away they go. They don't understand the root cause. They haven't done the analysis. They aren't looking at why that has happened and they're just flicking a switch somewhere and assuming that that is going to defend us for the next time round. And I think the idea that it could be presented back to us as services and that organizations could be buying these licenses and then having unqualified people providing a security service is actually a real concern, because you're making this, whereas it's really critical, you are again exposing yourself to risk because you've got a handful of people who have outsourced, who've been given a tool but don't really understand what they're trying to protect you against.
Yeah, I think one of the things I was quite interested in as well was kind of some of the, I mean, again, Microsoft will share all the, where all the value is and things, but there was a lot of focus around the need for executive reporting, right? So, and some of the customers, other customers I've been speaking to that are running pilots around this have said, actually where it's really good, and I haven't seen their output, obviously, these are executive reports that they generate, but actually is providing information back to senior leadership around these are the kind of things that we've seen, these are what we've closed down, because they tend to find that information that comes from their SOC analyst teams is just far too technical and almost it's not business impacting messaging, it's bits and bytes and those kind of things. So I think that will be quite interesting to see where those come from. And I think that hopefully the advantage that we've got in these sorts of tools is that because these are security trained models rather than just the generic OpenAI platforms, then you would hope that the reports wouldn't suffer from hallucination, right? You absolutely don't want these executive level reports to suffer from some of the made up gibberish that comes from these tools as well. So because it's all about trust, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's key, Rob. I think for me, our SOC analysts, our security engineers are, in their day job, they're not used to writing management exec reports, and anything they can do to translate those techie words into C-level documentation is really good. And if I think about Copilots in general, that's probably summarization, simplification, adapting the content for the audience is incredibly good. And if it can do it on that and save them some time, then that's got to be a good thing, as long as the numbers are right at the start, of course, and the details right.
And I think, Rob, is what does the C-suite care about in terms of security? And I'm a big advocate of, you don't necessarily just buy all the tools. It's about people and culture in the end around security. So you can throw as much products at security as you want, which is all very good and helpful, but actually, certainly my business is a lot of the security issues are down to people. Yeah. And actually, how as a C-suite do you focus the whole organization's view on security, not just the stuff that the SOC do? So how do you do learning, development, training? How do we get to understand everyone's role in that? And I think a lot of organizations get that wrong. It's just seen as a nerdy ICT thing. And we can buy another product and it will solve all the problems. Copilot will solve some of them, but it won't. It doesn't solve the people and cultural and learning and development issue, which is the area generally organisations don't bother on as much. But it depends on the sector, depends on the type of business.
Yeah, I think that's a really important topic. I mean, and be interesting again, everyone else in how we do that across our organizations, right? I mean, if I look at us internally, we do cybersecurity awareness training. I would say it's probably the minimum of what we should do. We are a tech company, so I think there is often the assumption that, well, therefore everybody understands the risks and the concerns and those kind of things. And I think we only have to look at the amount of data now that probably gets shared into the 400 odd public GPT powered services that are out there, right? We just willy-nilly share information all over the place. We've got probably more applications and more shadow IT than ever in many cases. We've got the ability of teams of people to build their own power apps and build bots and stuff and stick them into teams or whatever they're doing. It's a really valid point of how do we actually, does this help solve the underlying problem, right? So there's external threats, of course, which continue. But like you say, there's a lot of threats internally, and a lot of things that can be address by training and education, right, and things to look for. Do many of you do a lot in that space with your teams?
So I was going to just jump on what Matthew just said there. You know, you can have all the tools under the sun, but if your colleagues, if your staff, if your teams are abusing the security or they're unaware of what's going on, it's a massive risk. And I think that this, you know, Copilot Security is one piece in a very, very complex jigsaw puzzle, and the human element should never ever be underestimated. I mean, like, and so I think it, and that's maybe two different conversations. I think this conversation here is kind of more the back end engineering, kind of here's the solution, and you know, we touched on presenting the data back in a consumable fashion so it can be reported at a level so that people understand it, and then that feeds into the other conversation. I'm literally going into an executive meeting after this, and I'm going to be talking to this kind of information, and if I can't get my managing partner to truly understand the value in this, it's not going to help with the learning and development team. It's not going to help with how we deal with onboarding, offboarding, and the human element. So for me, this is where it does empower that. If this comes back with some better reporting that helps me visualize the information in a way that can then facilitate a better conversation at a leadership level about how we engage the human element, then I think that's a win. But again, you've got to see it. I mean, this is all conjecture because we're all making assumptions. But if it does do some of these pieces that we're hoping it does, that actually does become, again, impactful in a different way.
Yeah, I mean,
it does go beyond simply the training and the understanding of that education. It's ensuring that training remains current, more so now than ever, because the threats are moving at such a rate. The traditional forms of identifying a phishing email aren't there anymore. It's not the poor grammar. It's not the urgency of the email. It's a relationship built within 2 or 3 emails. Voice cloning, things like that are very much more and more prevalent now. So ensuring that we're constantly reviewing and managing that awareness piece and ensuring that training is current, aligned with the threats.
Yeah, I think, and it's kind of some of that stuff. And I've not seen this actually. And it's an interesting point of, I would expect these tools as well, right? Because one of the things that, you know, Copilot's got the ability to do, of course, is it's analyzing however many trillion, 70 odd trillion signals now, whatever they talk about. But you'd actually expect now the ability to have curated training based on those threats, right? How do you provide that information to users or to IT to present back to their teams to help with those things? The other thing I think is important, Ken, your point was one of the kind of key selling points that Microsoft talk about of their kind of what does Copilot do, right? Is about this, and they call it boost compliance, right? But the terminology they use is, I'm just trying to read it from the page, but it's about, you know, proactively monitoring your security and compliance scores, and then providing business level reporting around your continual compliance against those regulations or risks. Now that's quite interesting. If you actually could get to a point, and I haven't seen these myself, but I think this would be really valuable. I look at the work that our compliance and security team do and what they present to us, and they must spend a day a month, you know, compiling information to share with us that we get in a report and we look at and go, so do we need to do anything? That's ultimately, when it comes to us, that's what we're looking at. Is there anything we need to do? Is there a recommendation on the back of it? And that's a day of work. For somebody, probably more. I should probably ask him. But if these tools can give us those kinds of insights and data, and that actually really, that's real tangible evidence. And you still want someone to review that, right? And go, yeah, that's talking rubbish. Because if it ends up being a glorified marketing tool to try and sell you more products, then it's kind of not really the goal. But I think these are some of the values, I think, that could be really game changing from that point of view of keeping people doing their job that they should be doing, rather than, Dave, to your point, you know, getting them to do work that they're not really comfortable with, they're not really happy with the language, and they're probably using other GPT tools now to help them write those reports better. Why not take that away from them?
Yeah, I think you're right. Sorry, Rob. I was just going to say things like secure score, exposure score, and all those things are metrics that are now actively used. We're seeing it in cyber assurance quotes and things like that now. So they do need active tracking and monitoring. And if you're reporting back to the business rather than it just be a bland score, you want to say what the improvement is and what the next steps are going to be. And the SOC analysts and security analysts have just not got that. It's not their forte. They'd rather be doing the proper analytical work. So I think it's essential.
Yeah, and I think when we then think about price, right, and I think obviously none of you have purchased this yet, so I was going to ask you kind of what you've seen from a pricing perspective, but it's an interesting model, right? So when this was in preview, it was kind of a blanket cost. I think again it seems to be the $100,000 seems to be the magic number that Microsoft charged for these Copilot proof of concepts, right? But they've moved obviously to a pay-as-you-go model for security Copilot. So I was just interested in your kind of thought around that, whether you think that's is that a good move because it enables organizations based on size and scale and product usage and those kind of things to kind of scale, or would you have rather almost seen a like a premium license bundle attached to your product sets? Ken, thoughts?
I think I'd like to have seen it as part of look, we buy some top end licenses. I'd like to have seen that included in even if it was just almost a loss leader for Microsoft to just get people to move up the license scales and having it in the very top licensing, and those people who already invested, it doubles down to that whole building that ecosystem. So we're not going to go away from it because we've got a rich licensing experience. And this idea that you can pay as you go, don't get me wrong, it still works for me. We're a small organization, so we're not necessarily going to have that many licenses, so it's not such a substantial cost. But again, it's one of these things where I'm sure there's lots of development, I'm sure there's lots of cost associated with running it, but it's a shame that Microsoft couldn't see its way to giving it as some sort of loss leader to those people that have already loyally invested into that Microsoft ecosystem.
Yeah, so Matt, I think Hillingdon have got imagine a relatively large investment on their enterprise agreement. Of any insightful conversation with Microsoft on these things? I know you can't share commercials, but I'm as interested. Is this a topic that they're driving you towards as part of your?
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. And rather than thinking about today, I'm trying to understand what it might look like in a year's time as we're building the budgets moving forward. And back to my previous point is what do licenses look like in, the start of the financial year in 2025 around the additions to all the existing, we've just moved from an E3 to an E5 license and we've got Copilot for 365, but, what's it going to be like from a license perspective and the costs associated in a year's time? And there's very little freebies. It's just a direction of travel of licenses are just going to go exponentially up and up as tools are added to it, which is quite a scary space for us to be in. Actually, you always feel like, given the marketing around all these things, you always feel a bit like you're behind. Because you haven't got all the tools, or you can't roll them out as quickly enough. And again, what did it look like in 6-12 months is a difficult place to be in, because you have to go back and show. I keep on talking about business benefits, but you have to show from a savings or a productivity benefit every single time anything's launched. And again, that it's almost becoming a governance burden, is having to go out and prove the value of all these things moving forward. And it's kind of that bit where you test it and people like it. Again, why are you not going to like Copilot for security? Why, Copilot across everything in Microsoft is going to be a good thing, but it's attributing the cost to the business benefit because, again, they're the lower entry, nice to have, improving productivity. But what does that look like on your bottom line? I don't think there's been a massive amount of evidence to show how does it affect people's bottom line.
Yeah. And I think that's what we're going to see this year. Right? I think if you think about last year with, all of the rise of the AI tools, right, it was very much about new things, trials, that everything was in its infancy. I think if we look at probably 2024, I think we're going to see probably more trust in the products because they've been out there a bit more. There will be more of these use case studies from everybody. You've obviously got, Cisco's huge acquisition of Splunk, right? I was on a webinar on Thursday listening to that. And again, if you played AI bingo in that 25-minute session, it was all around the same kinds of messages around actually how these tools are going to bring all these signals together and solve everyone's problems. So I think this competitive landscape is going to be quite interesting. We touched on this before on a previous show about Microsoft's dominance, obviously, in the productivity space, and looking at what they've had to do around teams now for new customers and separating teams because of monopolies and things. But it will be interesting to see how these products fare from a pricing perspective. I think once the market's had a chance to use and prove those things. I mean, if you look today at, I was looking around at just Microsoft's pricing model for, let me see if I can show it on the screen, but they were talking a lot about, actually, is there even pricing on this screen? We did have some pricing. I'll see if I can find it. But the pricing model is pay as you go. I think it's all priced in these what they call security compute units. They recommend you need 3 security compute units in order to run a successful pilot. They don't really state about what the size that pilot should be. So, but from my calculations on UK money, that's about just shy of £9,500 a month, right? So it's I mean, it's definitely a cost of an expensive person, right, in that space. But that's quite a lot of money to invest in something that you're still learning and adopting and trying to work out where that goes. So again, it will be really interesting, I think, as we go into Microsoft's next financial year to see where they put funding to help organizations test and try these things out. Because to your point, Matt and Ken, there's definitely anything we can do to improve posture, anything we can do to increase the utilization of our people, but we need to have those hard costs. And actually, whilst you don't have to spend £100,000 to try it now, you still got to probably spend 60, if not more, in trying this technology out to see where those values are. I think also with the competition and the huge acquisitions in the security space, as always, it's going to be interesting to see what that. It only takes someone else, one of the big giants like Cisco, for example, to have a really compelling pricing model across their stack. They've got a very similar security stack in that space. It'd be really interesting to see what that competition does to pricing. I really hope they do something significant with that acquisition. Was it 28 billion? I mean, it's huge. It could be, this could be the new battleground, right? We had it with WebEx and Teams and those kind of things. I think from a security perspective, it could be really interesting to see what happens. And ultimately, if it doesn't drive down price, it's got to, isn't it? Got it, in my view. We're just about out of time, really. But again, thank you as always. Really, really good discussion. Did anybody have any kind of final thoughts or aspects? Are any of you planning on running a pilot of this stuff or looking at this stuff? Or
well, I was, but now you just said 60 grand. I'm really evaluating it.
For a year, right? Microsoft guidelines, I think, were 3 compute units per to run. I mean, you can run with 1, right? They price it for 1, so a compute unit is about 2 and a bit grand list, right, per month. Yeah. I don't see why you wouldn't run sooner. What they've recommended is 3. So if you look at their documentation, they recommend 3. But I've got a couple of other customers that are about to start on this with a single compute unit, which I think is probably what you're going to do, right? You're going to run it on a separate, even on a development environment and play around with it. I think that's what a lot of organizations will do. One of the things I did read was that if you've got Azure commitment spend on your enterprise agreement, you can use that as well, which is good. So if anyone's struggling to use their Azure consumption, then you can you can use it. But yeah, any other passing thoughts before we close down?
Actually, it was something just very quickly, and I think it was David who mentioned it, was that actually more and more organizations or companies like insurance, cyber insurance, are using things like these scores, that to the point where actually there is a return on investing in Copilot if it means that it reduces your premium by said investment. That alone covers itself, never mind all the extra you get. So I think this is quite a shrewd move by Microsoft, because they have worked out how some of this stuff is all interlinked. And I think there is some value that you wouldn't necessarily associate with just like you associate with the security and the protections, but actually the material bottom line cost reductions could be or cost increases by not having it. And I think that's an important
the cyber security insurance is a really interesting one, isn't it? Because I think most of the policies now require you to have XDR in order to protect you from an endpoint perspective. I don't know what the rest of you have seen, but I've certainly seen that kind of shift speaking to other customers.
So I've been asked, so again, something else I'm going through at the moment, but I have literally been, every single firm I've dealt with has asked for our security score and our compliance.
Interesting. That's interesting, but it's kind of seemed, and I think, Dave, you mentioned that as well. It's almost like a requirement. Share your score. It's a bit like your Experian credit score, isn't it? Share your security score with us.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Team, thank you. As always, really thought-provoking. I love listening to these back afterwards as well, and just pulling out some of those anecdotes that you've shared. So thank you. It's been really, really useful. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'm sure we'll be in touch if any of you are running a pilot. I'd love to hear your feedback and experiences of those things. And some of that feedback I'll be sure to share back with our Microsoft partner our Microsoft partner manager when we speak. So thank you.
Cheers all.
Perfect. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Bye bye.
Thank you.